Hello guys, welcome to a new video. For this one I'm going to be drawing two pictures as a gift for my friend Andrew, who is also one of my supporters on Patreon and one of Jakob's biggest fans. In fact, I think he could be the president of the Jakob fan club, which possibly doesn't have any members at the moment, but we can recruit some, we'll find some somewhere. But anyway, these were done as a gift because I do occasional gifts for my Patreon supporters. If you are interested in finding out more about my Patreon, I do have a link to it in the description box below. Basically, it's what I would refer to as a tip jar sketch blog. So you can donate any amount from $1 upwards per month, and then in return you get exclusive previews, work in progresses, I post sort of snippets of my writing as well as drawings, and just sort of news on upcoming things. So you get to see quite a few things that I wouldn't be posting on my other social media. So if you're interested in anything like that, please do check it out. Also on my Patreon I am posting the first draft of Constellations, which has come to a bit of a standstill because my to-do list is crazy right now. But I will be posting the first draft on there, so if you're interested in seeing how one of my stories comes together from the very beginning, that might be interesting for you to check out. But anyway, like I said, Andrew is one of my Patreon supporters and I'm really grateful, so I decided a little while back that I would offer some freebies to them. And unfortunately, because it took me a little while to get around to doing them because of my long to-do list, I decided to do two for each patron supporter instead. And so Andrew requested anything to do with Jakob or Sarah or angels. And so I was originally planning to draw like a crossover thing with Jakob and Sarah as angels, but then I just couldn't really work it out, so I just decided to draw them on their own. And so first off you can see me drawing Jakob here. Both of these were done on Daler-Rowney mixed media paper with Staedtler fineliners and then a mixture of different types of alcohol markers. Lately I have been mixing markers quite a lot. I don't tend to have a favourite marker, I tend to mix them up a bit because I just find that each of them has different features useful for different types of drawings. The markers that I used included the Kuretake Kurecolor twin tip alcohol markers, and then the Copic Ciao and Touch 3 and also Spectrum Noir Illustrator as well, which I just got some of recently. I'm still struggling to get used to them because the brush is quite thick and they do let out a lot of ink. They have a much heavier colour laydown than most of the other markers that I've got, so I am struggling a little bit to get used to them. I just thought I'd try them out because I'm planning a marker comparison video at some point soon, and what I'm going to do is colour the same drawing with all these different types of markers, and then hopefully you can get a real sort of genuine idea of how they really do compare. So I'm trying to get used to those ones, but they do have such a heavy colour laydown that it's difficult to do sort of subtle lines and also small details as well, because even the fine nib can sometimes just let out too much ink. So I did use a little bit of those, but mostly I used the Touch 3 and the Copic Ciao, which are probably my favourite two, which is funny because they're completely different ends of the price spectrum. But I really like using the combination of them because the Copic Ciao unfortunately is not good for filling in large areas. Like I mentioned in my Shiro marker drawing a few videos back, I said that unfortunately Copic was not good for filling in large areas, at least not the Ciao one specifically, because the brush tip just doesn't really enable for it, and also I'm always worried about damaging the brush tip if I try and use it for a large area. So I compromised by mixing the two together and using the Touch 3 to fill in the large spaces, and I find them really good for that. They've got a good solid colour laydown without being sort of too heavy, they don't bleed too much, and so I really like using them for the base colours. Then the extra effects in the backgrounds were added with Finetec metallic watercolour, which I got a little while back and I hadn't used properly until now, and I received some advice from some of my friends on Facebook about which colours to use, so thank you for that. And so I used the red violet on the background for Jakob and then used the blue pearl for a layer of sort of subtle colour variation on his cybernetic arm. And then in the background of the Sarah one I used the bronze, which I then decided to also use on her eyes to add a sort of effective eyeliner, which I was really happy with. And then at the very end I used a combination of two different white gel pens. I used to use white Posca for highlights all the time, but I found that it could be a bit too much because it's opaque. It's actually a paint rather than just an ink, and so it gives a very opaque effect and sometimes it's just a bit too much. So I used a combination of two different gel pens. There was the Pentel Hybrid Gel Grip, and then there was also the Rotring Star Gel Clic. And the Rotring tends to lay down a lighter layer of colour, which is odd because I always thought it was the Pentel that did that, but the Rotring definitely seems to have a sort of paler, more see-through tone to it, so you can layer that one up more. But I used a combination of those two to kind of add some depth into the characters by highlighting their hair and adding a little bit of highlighting detail around the edges of their faces and clothes as well. Sorry for the amount that I stuck my head in the way while I was doing the line art and sketch on Sarah. I genuinely didn't realise I was doing it, so I'm going to try and work on that next time. I just got so engrossed in what I was doing that I didn't realise I was sticking my head right in the way, so I apologise for that. I hope it's not too distracting. So onto the characters that I'm drawing here. If you've been following me for a while, you will probably be familiar with Wired, which is my sci-fi cyberpunk project. It is a novel that I'm also going to be adapting into a webcomic, and these two are two of the main characters. So Jakob and Sarah both work for the police force in a sector called the National Artificial Intelligence Bureau, and this is a sector that deals with all crimes related to artificial intelligence of any kind. Obviously there's not a lot I can tell you without giving away details of the whole story, so I'll just give you a few facts about the characters. Sarah works for the combat department. Jakob used to work for the combat department but has now become the manager of one of the other departments, so he's a little bit out of practice in the combat department, and the way that he talks you'd think he was about 90 years old. He's actually 38, but he acts as if he's about 90 and he just wants to sit down. And so he's a little bit out of practice with combat, so when they're out on the field together they do tend to complement each other quite well in that way. Sarah is 34. She is a real magpie for anything shiny. She loves jewellery. The earrings that you can see in this picture here were given to her by Jakob when they started going out. He doesn't spend money on extravagant things, so that's a rarity from him, but it does show how much he cares about her because he knew she really wanted those. As well as that, she loves makeup. She is like the queen of eyeliner because she's had a lot of practice in putting on eyeliner really fast in between, sort of running between the gym and meetings and so on, so she can apply eyeliner in a flash. And she loves fashion as well. I really enjoyed drawing her top, even though it was a bit of a challenge. Sorry if you've got some traffic noise in the background here. I live on a bus route and it's getting a bit noisy. But yeah, I had fun drawing her top because I thought I'd draw kind of a paisley print, but then I wasn't sure how it looked, and I decided to just colour over it all with a darker colour, and it ended up with kind of a suede effect almost, and I kind of like it, like it's got a sort of texture. I really like that. So yeah, she really likes fashion, makeup, jewellery, she likes reading, she likes going to the gym, and she doesn't really take any nonsense, so she's the ideal person to partner with Riker on an investigation. I haven't done any videos featuring Riker yet, but I do really need to because you guys need to be introduced to him. Riker is actually one of Jakob's closest friends, but you wouldn't guess from the way they bicker. But he's a bit of a difficult person to work with, and Sarah knows how to deal with him. She's kind of what you see is what you get, and she's calm on the surface and she's calm underneath, whereas Jakob tends to have a facade over his real feelings, and he can get pretty annoyed underneath, but you won't see it on his face. He always drinks his coffee black, he very rarely eats anything, and he very rarely takes breaks either. He just sort of works straight through the day. So he's not particularly an easy person to work with either, but it's not because he just doesn't know how to behave like Riker, it's just because all his focus is on his work. He's got a reputation for being very fair among his staff and they all look up to him, but he does tend to forget that not everyone works 14 hours without a break like he does, so he can be a little too focused on his work to remember the well-being of other people. It's not a conscious decision, he's not a horrible person, that's just the way he is, and sometimes he needs reminding. And that's where Sarah comes in, because she's one of the few people that will give him a nudge and say, hey, you need to do this, and most other people tend to be a little bit afraid of him, and that's partly because of his own kind of the facade that he puts on, and partly because there's a lot of stigma around people who are cyborgs, and obviously he's a heavily modified cyborg. And so the media tend to sort of spin stories about cyborg behaviour and the danger that they could present, and a lot of it is nonsense, but unfortunately not a lot of his staff know him well enough. Since he's their boss, he's not their friend, they kind of have the wrong perception of him, so things can be a little bit awkward. So Sarah can kind of be the mediator between the two, because people feel that they can talk to her a lot more freely than they can talk to Jakob. So yeah, I think that's pretty much everything. I really enjoyed using the Finetec watercolours as a finishing touch for each of these pieces. I did find them a little bit tricky to build up the layers because they took a few layers to get the colour opaque enough to how I wanted it, but overall I'm really happy with the final effect, and hopefully Andrew likes them as well. I do have more Patreon gifts to do, so I may record the process of those too, but like I said, if you have any questions about the materials that I used or the process of my drawing or anything, do let me know, and I hope to see you next time in my next video. Thank you for watching, bye!